So still thinking about ethics of technology. The most interesting thing for me about this class, which won't be the most interesting thing for any of you about this class, is that I did this research, I think 3 years ago. I think 2 or 3 years ago, not a long time ago. And I think things are really, really different already. In terms of the technologies that we're talking about. So when I started working on this, I was thinking a lot about Facebook and about Twitter, and Twitter was still Twitter then. So that already, I think, dates the project. And actually, I think that is emblematic of one of the problems that I see happen a lot when people critique specific technologies. So you've, articles about Facebook or about Twitter or about smartphones, and they're obsolete pretty much as soon as they're written because the technology is changing so quickly. So I guess, right, to take my own advice, this shiur was obsolete, I guess, as soon as I created it, except that I'm interested not actually in a particular manifestation, or not only in a particular manifestation, though, as I said, I was interested in Facebook when I started this, but in the underlying principles of actually a lot of different technologies. And so as I was getting ready today and yesterday, I was thinking, what's different about this conversation now that AI is so firmly in the mix? Right, so specific things that have changed about AI in the last few years are its availability, the distance we think it can go, right? The things that we think it's going to be able to do in terms of surveillance, in terms of responsive behavior. People say sometimes, right, we passed the Turing test a long time ago. The Turing test was meant to be yeah, thank you. I'm just closing doors. The Turing test was something like, if a person could reasonably pass as a computer, they passed the Turing test. So that happened already. And according to some, right, the next threshold would be AGI. And that would be like a kind of generalized AI that can do lots of different things, right? That isn't just good for one particular purpose, but that can be responsive. So I think that's a shift in the last even just 2 years, that we're already talking about computers that can not just like do an okay job imitating a human, but actually that we might really interact with as humans, which is different than even just like an algorithm on Facebook. So what I'd like to be able to posit is that the technology has changed, but the underlying issue is the same. And the question that I have is, because I thought a lot about how this issue applies to the technologies that we had. And so the question that I have is how this issue of what I'm going to call stealing consciousness, or Geneivat, applies as technologies advance. So the first source of sorts that I put on here is my favorite optical illusion by M.C. Escher. It's called Relativity. And I used to think that Escher was a mathematician. I think I learned that at some point. He wasn't really. He was just kind of like sort of vaguely understood math concepts, but he wasn't an expert. But he made these mind-blowing images that play with your perception of reality, or they play with things that you know to be real and concrete in the world, and kind of turn it upside down. So the question as you look at this is what's wrong with this picture? So if you're on Zoom, you can put that in the chat. Michael, you can respond, but what's like 3 things that are wrong with this picture?
There's no consistent up.
Yeah, there's no consistent up, right? And the same thing, right? The stairways go the wrong direction. the people are kind of climbing the walls. It's hard to tell in some cases whether a stairway goes up, down, or across. It's the way the railings are placed. I think maybe it takes you a second when you look at it to realize that there's something wrong. But not much more than that, right? You pretty quickly see that this is not an accurate depiction of reality. But like it takes a little longer to kind of put your finger on, well, what exactly? Because it's kind of realistic, right? Like you know what it is. It's a building and its steps. But it takes a minute to name exactly what's wrong with it. Right, you can just keep turning it, turning it to all the sides. I've tried. It doesn't ever fully resolve it. Yeah. And so I think about, or I thought about optical illusions, and I learned about Escher when I was a little girl and always like really loved his stuff. And I think anything like that, right? Optical illusions, magic tricks, sleight of hand, there's something about it that is tricking you. And one of the questions you ask is like, is it obvious that this is a trick? So in this case, like I said, it takes a second to realize that something's wrong. I think that happens quickly, but it takes longer to figure out what's wrong with this picture. One of the conversations that's emerged about social media in recent years, and again, you'll help me think, I hope, about how to extend this to newer technologies. One of the conversations that's emerged is Facebook, Twitter, now X, Instagram, name your platform of choice. They don't present as something being wrong with it. Right? They don't, unlike the Escher, where you look at it and you're like, this is not quite reality. This is not quite real. Social media sites don't, I think, present that way. You don't immediately realize that. And I would say that is like the generalizable problem of the internet, that things are there. And if they look plausible and they seem plausible, then we're less likely to stop and say, wait, what's wrong with this picture? I think this is definitely true about, right, this like misinformation on the internet and this misinformation on social media platforms, but I am more interested in the more prosaic case. So not the false information that's there, that's a concern also, but actually the real information that's there. And this brings me back to the Escher. Like you see it, it's like actually staircases, actually walls, but it takes you a minute to be like, wait, but like what is actually wrong with this picture? Because it kind of should work, but it doesn't quite. And social media to a large extent is like that. And I think that the experience of interacting with generative AI can be like that. That even when it's telling you the truth, I'll put that in air quotes, but even when it's real, there's still something kind of fake about it. So maybe the example that I would give for Facebook is the bubble, that you go on Facebook and you see it's like, and people say everybody's talking about this thing. Well, let's talk about everybody. At last check, something like 3 billion people are on Facebook. That's a lot of people, but it's not everybody. Okay, it's not everybody, and it's something like 50-ish per 54 or something percent of Americans are active Facebook users, which is a lot of everyone, but it's not everyone. And you're not seeing all of those billions of people. You're not friends with all those billions of people. You're friends with, I don't know, actually, that's another change that's happened. I'm not really on Facebook anymore since I used to be. So I don't know. I have 800 friends. I'm not sure. Let's call it 1,000 friends. You have 1,000 friends. Even 1,000 friends, they're not all saying that thing, and you're not seeing what all of them say because the algorithm is playing with what you see, and when you see it. And I put this quote from the movie The Social Dilemma. Anyone see the movie The Social Dilemma? It's actually a really interesting movie, even my children admitted. So the quote is, over time, you have the false sense that everyone agrees with you because everyone in your newsfeed sounds just like you. And that once you're in that state, it turns out you're easily manipulated, the same way you'd be manipulated by a magician. a magician shows you a card trick and says, pick a card, any card. What you don't realize is they've done a setup. So you pick the card they want you to pick. And that's how Facebook works. Facebook sits there and says, hey, pick your friends. You pick the link you follow. But that's nonsense. Just like the magician, Facebook is in charge of your newsfeed. I think this is now pretty widely acknowledged. I'm not sure it actually changes people's perception in the moment, though. I think we can now all talk about the bubble of Facebook, but I'm not sure that it changes how people feel when they actually see that. So a lot of conversations about like again, what's wrong with the specific platform of Facebook? What's wrong with specifically social media? And at the time when I first did this research, I published a short article with in the Hartman Journal Sources, and there were a few of us published, and one of the responses was like, well, not responses to my piece, just in the journal was, well, we just need a better social media platform, right? Like we need technology to combat the technology, essentially, a better social media platform. So there are, what's the other one called? Blue Sky, something about Sky. It's called Blue Sky. Tries to do this where it gives you control over your algorithm. I'm skeptical of the idea that we're going to build a technology that's going to undo the technology that we did in this case. But and I think the reason, or one of the reasons that I'm skeptical, is because I think that the focus tends to be on, well, it's misinformation, it's your bubble, you're not seeing. And I think the underlying problem is the invisibility of the trick, that you don't notice it. So maybe if you had to build your own algorithm every time you went to go, you would notice, maybe it would solve that problem. I'm not sure, because I would be lazy and I would just use your algorithm, and then I'm not sure it would work. I think it's what's called Geneivat, which is, I translated as stealing consciousness, even though it gets translated different ways in different places, but I use that translation very, very intentionally. It's described as a type of stealing. And stealing is an interesting prohibition to try to give parameters for. When would you say that someone is stealing? So like most obvious case of stealing is an object. I think that's true. It is most easy to talk about stealing a tangible thing. And in the 10 Commandments, which we'll get to in a second, when it says, lo tignov, you shouldn't steal, I think, and a lot of the commentators think, that is like the primary case that we're talking about. Don't take something. The Tosefta in Bava Kama says, Shiv'a ganavin hen. There are 7 types of thieves. If you can name all 7, great. Off the top of my head, I cannot. This is also true of a lot of other lists of 7 in the Talmud, like the 7 beautiful women and the 7 Neviot, and it's like listing the 7 dwarves. You always leave one out. There are 7 types of thievery. Just take their word for it. But the highest level, or maybe it's the lowest level, Harishon Shebekulan, Gonev Dat Habriot, is someone who steals the consciousness of another person. And there's other things which are probably examples of that. Someone who insincerely invites someone else to their house, but they don't actually want that. Or you give somebody lots of gifts, but they won't accept them. So you're like, here, take this, but they won't actually take it. That's also or you open barrels of wine that are already sold to someone else. Like you've already made money off them. You can't really serve them all, but you open them to be impressive. Other things, you have improper measures and weights, things like that. You mix things into your oils. Okay, lots of different examples, presumably, of gonev dat habriot, but that's the highest form of stealing, which goes against that instinctive, right? Like if I asked you, right, what's the primary form of thieving you could think of? It's to take, if I take your phone, that's for sure stealing. The Tosefta says, no, actually, again, I never know whether to say highest or lowest. The lowest level of thieving is stealing someone's consciousness. Below od elashema alin alav she ilu haya yachol lignov dat ha'elyona haya gonev. Very unusual kind of formulation for a text like the Tosefta, which is the Tosefta is a parallel to the Mishnah. So it's really it's a legal text, and it usually is fairly cut and dried. Not only is this the worst form of stealing, but we consider this person who stole the consciousness of another person to be like somebody who tried to fool God. Right? They're like someone who, if they could have fooled God, they would have fooled God. Um, and actually, yeah, if you steal another person's consciousness, you're considered a thief. And I guess the implication is, once you're considered a thief, if you could steal from God, you would steal from God. There's not a line for the Tosefta there. It's like, if you could, you would. That's the Tosefta's assertion. And I think it begs the question, first of all, right, it's not what you immediately think of when you think of stealing. It doesn't list all 7 kinds of stealing necessarily. And why is this the worst form of stealing? Anyone have thoughts about that?
I think because it isn't obvious and the person may not know for a while that you're actually cheating them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So like when your cell phone gets stolen, or you're like, someone steals your wallet, at least you like know, right? You see that your wallet has been stolen. This is closer to the magician's sleight of hand. You don't even realize that this thing has been done, maybe until much later. Certainly until it's too late. I think that's right. And I think maybe that also is why the reference to God is there, right? That if you could have, you would have even fooled God, because you're essentially trying to, right, stealing something. I feel like it's like the quintessential example of like, okay, maybe the other person doesn't realize right, but you know, and God knows. But this Geneivat thing is like, it's meant to be so subtle. It's as if you think that really like no one's gonna ever catch you. Maybe. Any other thoughts about that?
It's central to a person's identity or essence,
What is central?
their consciousness.
Yeah, I think that's the other reason. Also, I think that this idea of dot, I I think that it's sometimes useful to work backwards from the term that something is called. And sometimes you say, well, it's like just semantics, right? Like I taught this once. Someone said, no, it's just a form of tricking someone. It's just deception. But we have words for deception. We call that, sheker, or like midzavar sheker tirchak would be the halachic language, right? Stay far away from things that, I don't know, smell like deception. I think the choice to call this Geneivat dot is telling us something about how it's thought of in ethical terms, that you're taking something away from someone that almost like they didn't know they could give up, or they're not going to know, like to your point, Marilyn, they're not going to know that they gave it up, and they didn't even know that they could cede it in some way. And I think that that does kind of get to this deeper ethical problem. If you look at the next source, the Gemara in Chulin, it's a halachic conversation about basically what to do with the thigh of an animal that has the gid hanasheh in it. So Jews can't eat the gid hanasheh. So surely you could just give it to a non-Jew. But then the Gemara debates, like, can you really just give it to a non-Jew? So one concern is that the non-Jewish person, not realizing it's a big deal, might go on to sell it to a Jewish person. But in the continuation of the Gemara, the last piece, Shmuel says, Asur lignov da'at habriot va'afilu da'ato shel oved kochavim. Actually, it's just forbidden to steal the consciousness of another person, even someone who is not Jewish. Which I think is such an interesting example, because you could say to yourself, this person like does not really care about the kashrut status of my meat, but they really don't care about it. So like I don't need to care for them. I don't need to tell them that this is not kosher. I don't need to tell them this contains sciatic nerve. Like I don't need to have that conversation with them. And sort of the earlier part of the Gemara is they go through all sorts of machinations to figure out, well, again, maybe you're concerned they're going to sell it to another Jew. Maybe, it wasn't announced loudly enough that you're selling this piece of meat. And Shmuel says, no, like you just can't trick people in that way. You just can't tell them something that is going to make them think that they know how things really are, and then they really don't. And I like that this conversation happens around kashrut because there is a way in which we think, well, this is just like an inside issue. It's not like, doesn't concern you at all. And so it's not that I'm trying to be dishonest. It's just that I feel like it's like TMI, right? Like why would I have this inside conversation kind of out loud? And this is an interesting moment to me where Shmuel is saying, no, actually, we need to be really public about these things. If there's something that you think is so, it's forbidden to you, but you really wouldn't eat it. So you need to be open about that when you're talking to, at the very least, people you're having business dealings with. And it's not about money, and it's not about selling it to other Jews, which is like that's the easy way out of this Gemara, right? Is to just say, well, we're just worried you're going to sell it to another Jew. Shmuel says, no, this is Gonev dat Habrio. I put the piece from the Ten Commandments on here because, again, most of the commentators say this is like definitely about stealing a thing. The Ibn Ezra, among others, starts with that, but he eventually gets to V'zot hamilah gam hi kolelet mi sheyignov lev acher, that this word also applies to somebody who steals someone else's heart. Okay, so this is like a whole other share we could have. Maybe we will. I've started doing some work on this, but like lev and dat are somewhat interchangeable in rabbinic literature, because if you live in the, I don't know, I guess definitely like the Torah, Talmud, and I guess the Rishonim also, the place where you make decisions is your heart. So your da'at, which we would associate, I think, I don't know, raise your hand if you would not associate da'at with your brain. Like I would. But that's not how it plays out in rabbinic sources, right? Like it's quote, right? Like, that God should give us lev ladat, right? A heart to know. That's where knowledge is. Carly, do you have something to say, or I just get to see you now? No, okay. Hi. And okay, this is like a preview. Definitely the next time we get to this parsha, we need to talk about this. I never noticed this. I was yesterday years old when I realized this, but in Breshit, when Yaakov takes his family and leaves Lavan, right, leaves his father-in-law, who's not anyone's favorite person, famous from such stories as like Passover Seder, right, not considered to be a good guy, but Yaakov sneaks away with his wives and children. And it says, Vayignov Yaakov et lev Lavan haram, that Yaakov stole the heart of Lavan. That part I realized before. The part that I had not realized before, so all of you out there who are planning your Dvar Torah for the next Torah cycle, this comes right after Rachel steals the teraphim from her father, right after she steals the idols or whatever they are. And then it says that Yaakov stole Lavan's heart. Okay, we'll discuss. But in the meantime, this says that the translation here says stole the wits of Lavan, but literally, right, he stole his heart, or outwitted. There's lots of different translations here. And Ibn Ezra tells you, Lo ganav Yaakov ki im da'ato, ki ikar hadat balev. If you didn't believe me, now you'll believe the Ibn Ezra. Yaakov was engaged in Geneivat da'at, right, in stealing Lavan's consciousness, but da'at lives in the heart, and that's why the Torah says it was in his heart. The Torah says that Yaakov ran away. And to your point earlier, Marilyn, right, if Geneivat da'at is the thing that is so bad because you don't realize it, so it can't be that the thing that he did that was Geneivat da'at was the running away. because the point of running away is that people notice you run away, right? That's why you run away. And so the Malbim says that the stealing of the heart wasn't the running away. It was hiding it from him. That usually people can kind of tell what people are going to do because basically if somebody's mad at you, especially somebody you're close with. And what Yaakov did was he pretended. He convinced Lavan through his behavior that everything was good, things were as they had been. And so Lavan didn't notice. And the Geneivat dad here isn't the running away, it was what preceded it. It was the fact that he pretended that everything was fine. I don't feel like this gets enough press in a way because, and I think on the one hand you could say, well, Lavan was a pretty bad guy, so we're not devastated that, right? Like kind of you're rooting for Yaakov and his family in this story for sure, right? You're rooting for them to get away. Good job, Yaakov. You got your family away from Lavan. But I think that makes it more powerful in a way that the Torah bothers to tell us that this was a kind of stealing, right? Even though he's not a good guy, this was something, right? This is Geneivat dat in like the most classic sense. And the commentators notice that also and say, yep, right, Yaakov stole, which is also, by the way, like a whole thing because Yaakov steals other things. Okay, anyway, not a parsha here right now. So there is something about stealing, and there is something about stealing something that is not physical, and something that, and it does have to do with like not really noticing. And so I want to flip to the other term, which is da'at, as something that is, what do you say, Michael? Like core to like what people are, right? I put it as definitional here. And that's really all over rabbinic literature, starting from the creation. So I just put a small piece here, but you can kind of fill in the rest, that God caused all these great trees to grow, the tree that they're not supposed to eat from, arguably, one of the trees, is the Etz Hadat Tovara, the tree of knowledge of good and bad. There's lots of words for knowledge. Dad is only one of them, but dad is the word that gets used here. That word that also means kind of like consciousness or like a person's ability to make decisions. And the Ramban, in his commentary on the Torah, points to this and says the reason it's called the Etz Hadat, he says, Pri ha'ilan hazeh haya molid haratzon v'hachefetz shivcharu ochlav b'davar o behefcha latov o lara. That once you eat this tree, it makes you choose. Like it makes you, the way I would say it is like it gives you da'at, right? It makes you want to exercise da'at in the sense that you would then choose one thing or the other. And he says, Hadat yomar bilshonenu al haratzon. Da'at in our language means like the will to choose something. And he gives examples from the Gemara, which like I think are such interesting examples because I would kind of gloss over the word, like I have glossed over the word in translating those passages of Talmud in the past, right? We talk about da'at lachzor, that it's your intention to go someplace or to return to someplace. Other examples he doesn't give in the Gemara, one of the distinguishing features of a person who's empowered to say make decisions or even to like be able to buy and sell property, to do really anything in Jewish law, you have to be a bar da'at, you have to have this level of consciousness. It's one of the things that distinguishes minors from adults in Judaism. We say they have da'at at some point. And so da'at is this, he calls it koach hara'ayon, right? It's like it's your ability to have ideas and to choose things, to make conscious choices. That's what da'at is, to make conscious and informed choices. How's that for a definition of da'at? Yeah,
So it seems like it's a compound concept that has to do with having a certain amount of knowledge and then being able to manipulate it in a reasonable way. Or
I'm
I'm
not
more trying to
sure.
repeat back what you said and see if I got your point.
Yeah, I don't think it's about having knowledge. I think it's the ability to do stuff with the knowledge that you have. In other words, I think arguably you could have a lot of knowledge and still not have dot.
Mhm.
So maybe an example, if I think about the children thing, right? So kids can memorize really a lot of information.
Mhm.
And I mean, you are more the expert on children's minds than I am. I will just say anecdotally, right? I have
Mhm.
noticed that you can get a kid to memorize a lot of
Right.
information, but doesn't mean that they can make good choices with it or like really can manipulate it or like know what
Right.
it means. They've just taken in a lot of stuff. So I think that this is more about the ability to choose, and that's right. Ramban uses the word ratzon. It's about your will to
Yeah.
choose.
So Paul Applebaum, who sometimes comes here, Yoni Applebaum, his son lives here, right, wrote the paper on capacity for decision making in New England
Mm.
Journal like 20 years ago.
Cool.
And so it's the next time he comes, we should talk about this with him.
Yes, I would love to
Because,
hear.
yeah, he's got like kind of a compound definition of what it would be. And I'm not sure if he's basically working with the same concept or he's ever thought about how this connects, but
It's really interesting.
yeah.
Yeah. I I I hadn't really thought about it in those terms, but I do think that um Ramban is saying that it's separate from knowledge, and it wasn't just Ramban, but also Ramban. And what I like about that is that I think there is this idea that like the Etz Hadat Tovara was like, they is like the tree of knowledge, right? It's like
Right.
you eat it and then like all the things.
Mhm.
Which feels like, okay, like what's bad about it now, right? That sort of sets us up as being like up as, in that way. And this is more like people got this new capacity that they didn't have before that was around the will to choose. Why it's a bad thing is another story, but the Ramban at least is very clearly coming in on that, right? That it's not about the thing but it's about your capacity to choose between things, to consider one thing good and consider another thing bad, and your capacity to choose between things. The Tosefta, right? Same basic, source that we looked at earlier, like continuation, has such an interesting take on this that the first few times I read it, I thought I was reading it wrong. It says Migadol Gonev o Nignav. Who is the greater thief, the one who steals or the one who's stolen from? This feels like a trick question. I know it sounds like the English translation doesn't make sense. If you have a better idea, let me know. But that's literally what it says, right? Who's the worst thief, the one who steals or the one who's stolen from? Heve Omer, it does not give the answer you think it's going to give. Heve Omer Nignav. The greater thief is the person who is stolen from. Shiodea Shenignav Vishotek. If you know that you were stolen from and you don't say anything, right? You're silent. Let's think about that for a second. So you're actually, right, this Tosefta is all about hierarchies. The worst kind of stealing you can do is to steal the consciousness of another person, which we talked about in terms of a kind of sleight of hand, right? You're stealing something they don't know that it was stolen. And the thing that you're trying to take away is their capacity, right? You're sort of trying to block their capacity to make decisions. And now this new hierarchy is, but who's really the worst? The worst kind of stealing is Gonev Dad Habriot. But the worst kind of thief within that categorization, I guess, is the person who knows that they were stolen from and doesn't speak out. How do we feel about that?
I agree with that.
You agree with that? Okay.
I agree with that because if somebody is being stolen from and that person doesn't do anything, who's going to stop the initial stealer? So it's going to allow them to strike again. So in a way, the person who's the victim, for lack of better words, is keeping the floodgates open to more stealing.
It's really interesting. Yeah, right. They're not disrupting something that could become systemic. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's not instinctive, but I do hear it. Also, I think it adds a layer to this idea of Geneivat dat, which once I accepted that this was really what the source meant, felt to me like this is actually the core problem with a lot of our technology. It's not the technology is fooling us, but we are complicit in that. Right? We really allow ourselves to be fooled, and maybe I feel like that's even more true now. Like when I was doing this research, I think Social Dilemma was like a relatively new movie, and people were writing about this, and now like everyone's moved on. Like, headlines are about the war in Israel or they're about AI, right? Those are like your only, there ain't nobody, right? The Facebook trials are over. We've moved on from that. And so I think that is true, that there's a way in which even when we problematize these platforms or technologies, this is not a part that we talk about so much. In fact, I think maybe this is even increased, that we talk about big tech fooling us, tricking us, and not so much about the ways in which we're complicit in that. And we'll say things like, everybody thinks this, or right, like there is that, it's not true. And there are ways in which we buy into it anyway. But the continuation of the Tosefta is the really crazy part. This is actually what happened when the Jewish people stood at Har Sinai. They tried to fool God. Shneimar kol asher diber Hashem na'aseh v'nishma. Kivyachol nignav hu lahem. There's so much here. Okay. Bnei Israel were guilty of Geneivat dat at Har Sinai. I mean, this one, just like borne out by history, right? What did we say? We said na'aseh v'nishma, right? We'll do and we'll listen. Not so much, friends, right? That didn't work out. And so, okay, you could say that they didn't know that in the moment, but the Tosefta is not reading it that way. The way the Tosefta is reading it is they were trying to pull a fast one on God. But the crazy thing is God obviously knows, right? There's no havamina, there's no assumption in rabbinic sources that there's anything that God doesn't know. And so if they said this and God was like, great, let's move on, then God was complicit in the theft. So after, right, only caveats like kivyachol, right? Like it's as if nignav hu lahem. I don't know how to translate that it's like God was making God self-available to be stolen by the people. Something like that. This is your Shavuot for Torah, just a few weeks early, yeah. So maybe, right? God presumably has da'at. That seems kind of built into the assumptions about how humans becoming people who have da'at also. And this move at Har Sinai was an attempt to steal God's consciousness. So we were guilty of Geneivat da'at, but God was, I mean, it's crazy, but I don't think I'm saying this. I really think the Tosefta is saying this, right? God was more guilty than us in that moment because God was complicit in our desire to steal God's consciousness. Okay, and let's work that backwards for a second. Again, why is it so bad to steal consciousness? Right, presumably because like that's everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your da'at is your ability to decide, which maybe goes back to this question about like information. You can't make good decisions if you can't perceive information.
Like a necessary but not sufficient condition. Right, so you have to manipulate and Paul Applebaum's language,
Right.
and you have to do something with it.
Right.
Right.
Right. It's like you have to have the information, but I think that in terms of these sources, it's like you have to be able to correctly assess the information that's in front of you. And if I do something that I know is taking away your ability to assess things, that's Geneivat dat.
Mm-hmm.
Even without hiding a fact from you.
Right.
Can I ask a question?
Mhm.
Just going back to definition's sake, when we're saying stealing dot, are we talking on purpose or not on purpose? Because it sounds like at Har Sinai it might not have been on purpose, but if you're talking about like, I don't know, Medicare fraud, that might be on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a good question. I'm not sure that it being not on purpose would get you off the hook. I'm unsure. I definitely think that I think in this case, I think it is there is an intentionality in this source because it says big shoe, right? They tried to be gonev da'at. But I think that where for me the question of intentionality comes into play very clearly is this question of the person being stolen from, right? Because maybe you weren't so intentionally trying to steal their dot, right? Or trying to have your dot stolen rather. But you just kind of let it happen or you didn't intervene. So there's less intentionality there, and that's still or that's judged to be actually like the ultimate worst, right? That's like even worse than just stealing that. And this doesn't get like it doesn't get so much press as a category. Geneivat da'at is usually when it is translated into halachic cases, it usually has to do with things that are closer to what we would call ona'at dvarim. So using language to oppress someone or using language to kind of like cheat someone out of money, things that have more concrete consequences. Geneivat da'at, I mean, I'm sad that the Tosefta kind of ends the story here because what I want to ask is, okay, like, and then what, right? Like, God was fooled, or God knew that the people were trying to fool God. But it's also kind of a happy moment, right? In a way, right? We don't look at it certainly entirely in the negative, and I'm not sure. Like the Tosefta doesn't try to argue that there's a negative consequence here. It's just that like that in and of itself was problematic. And that is another aspect of the discourse around, again, particularly social media, but I think algorithms in general, that this kind of ethical language catches, I think, in a way that others don't catch. So one of the dynamics that happens, and I think you see it a lot with actually within the movie The Social Dilemma, is, people say things like, well, right, Facebook has X effect, Twitter has X effect. But if you look at yourself and you don't see that, or you as a group, right, like, it makes people believe misinformation. You're like, nope, I still read reputable news sources. I don't believe misinformation. Right? It makes you, I don't know, buy clothing from influencers. And you're like, nope, haven't bought, right? So you can kind of rule yourself out of all of the problems that are named, right? Can't do this because it leads to X bad consequence. What's interesting about this is that there's no consequences. It's just like, no, you just can't do that. You aren't supposed to try to take away that kind of clear decision-making power from someone else, and you're not supposed to let someone else try to take away that clear decision-making power from you. Just doing that is a transgression, even if you made the right decision in the end, even if it doesn't lead anywhere terrible, actually. And that's what I think is like the really powerful part about that idea, about that quote. One of my favorite kind of technology critics is the last source on the sheet. I promised it to end at the hour of when I was supposed to start. Michael Sakasis, who writes a lot about technology. His lens is a Christian lens, but also just sort of general. I mean, not everything he writes is about Christianity explicitly. So he writes, our digital tools promise to monitor and manage, among other things, our relationships, our health, our moods, and our finances. When we allow their monitoring and submit to their management, we outsource our volition and our judgment. I'm not sure he's ever heard of the term Geneivat, but I think that is a fairly good definition of, that is like a good summary of the definition that I see in the sources of Geneivat, that you're outsourcing your volition and your judgment. You're not trying to make decisions for yourself, but you're not really fully able to make good decisions for yourself because you're in this kind of MC Escher funhouse. And even when you say about yourself, no, but like I'm still making good decisions. I'm not following the staircase that goes nowhere, right? I am still able to make good decisions, but in being in that environment, for at least those moments, you're kind of outsourcing that ability. You're blocking yourself from those acts of da'at, or distancing yourself from those acts of da'at. I think that is an interesting problem to consider. I think that is, I haven't tried it so much, but I'm curious about using that as a language for talking about what's wrong with certain kinds of technology. Again, as opposed to the language of it will lead to X, because inevitably it doesn't lead to X for everybody. And so this framing about it being a moral category, tangible negative results can reinforce the issue, but they aren't the sum total of the issue. And so I think that will kind of allow us to assess the problem at a higher level. And another word for that maybe would be thinking about agency, and where we have agency and where we don't have full agency because algorithms, or whatever, insert your technology here, are really in control. And I will also say one last thing in terms of developments in technology. So for a lot of people, social media is real. And then for a lot of people, it's like, no, you get sucked in the moment, but you kind of know it's fake. Fake, again, not in the sense that the news is incorrect, but fake in the sense that this world was constructed around you and you are in the center of it, and it knows what you want and what you want to see and what you don't want to see, right? That's what I mean by fake. Not untrue, just robbing you of the ability to clearly see the world. But again, at this point, I think we at least intellectually know that about Facebook. This is going to get much, much harder. Again, as we approach AGI, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like as you think more about, let's say, robots that, seem kind of human, it's going to get even harder for us to make those distinctions. And I'm not sure that I think that means that we can never use those technologies. I think probably it doesn't, but I think it does raise the question of how are we going to hold on to our da'at? How are we going to make sure that we are naming this to ourselves and being clear about, where we're willing to cede? I guess the last thing I would say is that I think if you give something freely, maybe it isn't stealing. And so we need to think, where are we going to be willing to suspend disbelief? Like, I don't think there's a problem in looking at the Escher drawing. And where are we going to say, this constructs a universe for me where my da'at is compromised. And so it's not a place where I can be, or it's not a place where I can be too much, or whatever the parameters are that we're going to construct around it. So I welcome people's thoughts. I'm going to end with that in the interest of time. And thanks so much for joining. Bye, guys.